The entire royal court fell silent when Duke Lucien de Vereux stepped away from Celeste Beaumont, not slowly, not reluctantly, as though even standing beside her had become dangerous. Hundreds of candle flames trembled inside the Grand Hall of Versailles, while nobles watched the future Duchess stand alone beneath the gold arch prepared for their engagement blessing. Celeste did not move. She kept her chin lifted gracefully, though the blood had already drained from her face. A moment earlier, whispers had spread across the ballroom like poison. The prince's letters, the rumor of secret meetings, the accusation that Celeste Beaumont had become the hidden mistress of a married royal. Lucien's mother looked horrified. The bishops exchanged uneasy glances. The queen herself lowered her eyes, and Lucien said nothing. That silence broke her long before his words did. "I cannot bind the de Vereux name," he said coldly, "to scandal." Humiliation struck harder because his voice never shook. No anger, no grief, only restraint, only distance. The man who had once watched her across crowded rooms as though she were the only calm thing in his life now looked at her like a political mistake. A sharp whisper spread through the guests. Celeste heard someone laugh quietly. Another woman murmured, "How tragic." Her father's shoulders collapsed beside her, but Celeste remained perfectly still. That was the cruelest part. She did not beg him to stay. She did not defend herself. And somewhere beneath Lucien's controlled expression, panic flickered for the first time, because she looked at him once, only once, not with anger, not with hatred, but with heartbreak so quiet it almost felt like forgiveness. Then she removed the engagement ring from her finger. The sound it made against the silver tray echoed through the hall. "I understand, Your Grace," she said softly. The title hurt more than anything else. She curtsied gracefully and walked away while all of France watched her fall apart in silence. Rain struck the carriage windows that night as Lucien sat alone in darkness. He could still see her face, still hear the restraint in her voice. He told himself he had done what was necessary. His family name could not survive scandal. The crown was already watching House de Vereux carefully after growing unrest among several noble factions. One wrong move would destroy them. But none of those thoughts quieted the ache in his chest. The carriage stopped before his estate. His younger brother Adrian waited inside the entrance hall, pale and anxious. "Well," Adrian asked carefully. Lucien removed his gloves slowly. "It is finished." Relief flooded Adrian's face too quickly, too strangely. Lucien noticed it immediately. But before he could speak, Adrian turned away, and for the first time that night, unease settled deeply into Lucien's bones. Meanwhile, Celeste sat alone inside her childhood bedroom while servants quietly removed gowns and jewels from their cases downstairs. Her family was already being abandoned by society. Invitations withdrawn, friends disappearing overnight. Her mother cried behind closed doors. But Celeste simply sat beside the window, staring into the rain. A knock came softly. Her younger cousin Isabelle entered carefully. "You must tell them the truth," closed her eyes. "They destroyed you." "Yes." "Then why protect him?" For the first time, pain cracked through Celeste's calm expression, because she remembered Adrian kneeling before her weeks earlier, trembling with terror. The hidden documents, the accusation of treason, the prince's involvement. One scandal could condemn the entire de Vereux family, even Lucien, especially Lucien. So Celeste had allowed society to believe the rumors surrounding her meetings with the prince. She had sacrificed herself before Lucien ever asked her to. And he had abandoned her anyway. Tears finally filled her eyes, not because of the court, not because of the humiliation, but because the man she loved had never once asked if she was innocent. By winter's end, Celeste Beaumont disappeared from Paris entirely, and Lucien realized too late that silence could haunt a man far louder than regret, especially when the woman he betrayed vanished without ever defending herself. 3 years later, France adored Duke Lucien de Vereux. Women watched him enter ballrooms with quiet fascination. Men respected him with cautious admiration. The crown trusted him now. Power suited him cruelly well. He had become colder since Celeste disappeared, more disciplined, more distant. He rarely smiled anymore. And yet every ballroom still reminded him of her, especially the winter waltzes, especially the roses, especially silence. Lucien stood near the palace balcony during the king's annual masquerade gathering while snow drifted beyond the glass windows. A countess was speaking to him. He barely heard her, then the music changed. And suddenly the entire room shifted, people turned, whispers spread. Lucien looked toward the grand staircase and forgot how to breathe. Celeste Beaumont descended slowly beneath candlelight in silver silk, more elegant than he remembered, more composed, but colder. The years had softened nothing. If anything, they had sharpened her beauty into something untouchable. The ballroom watched her like a returning queen. Lucian's pulse turned uneven. She did not look at him, not once. A man descended beside her, tall, refined, foreign, Count Elias von Reinhardt of Austria, beloved across European courts for his charm and diplomacy. His hand rested lightly against Celeste's waist, and Lucian suddenly understood jealousy in its ugliest form, because Celeste smiled at the Count, a real smile, small, warm. Effortless. Lucian had not seen that smile in years. The Queen herself welcomed Celeste warmly. The same society that once destroyed her now reached desperately for her favor again. People admired her resilience, her elegance, her mysterious disappearance. Rumors had become romantic over time, and Lucian hated them for it, because none of them knew what her silence had truly cost. He watched Count Elias lean close to whisper something near her ear. Celeste laughed softly. Lucian's hand tightened around his glass hard enough to crack it. Blood slid across his fingers. "Careful, Your Grace," his friend Henry murmured. Lucian barely heard him. All evening he watched men gather around her, watched women praise her gowns, watched society worship the very woman it had once buried alive. But Celeste never approached him, never acknowledged him. And somehow that hurt more than anger would have. Later that evening, Lucian finally crossed the ballroom toward her. The orchestra softened into a slower melody. Guests discreetly stepped aside. Everyone remembered, everyone watched. Celeste turned calmly as he approached. Her expression remained graceful, unreadable. "Lady Beaumont," he said quietly. "Grace." The distance in her voice struck him immediately. No bitterness, no emotion at all. He searched her face desperately for traces of the woman he once knew. "Shepherd's Hill has reopened for winter," he said awkwardly. "You always loved the lake there." "I did." Past tense, every word between them felt sharp. Lucian glanced toward Count Elias speaking nearby. "You seem close to the Count." "We are engaged." The world around him seemed to stop. Though her voice remained calm, he noticed the faint tension in her fingers, as though she had expected this moment for a long time. Lucian stared at her. "You are to marry him?" "Yes." The orchestra continued playing. People danced around them. But Lucian felt strangely detached from the room, as though he were watching someone else lose her. "She appears happy." Someone nearby whispered, "Happy." The word devastated him, because once years ago he had believed he would be the man responsible for that happiness. Instead, he had become the reason it disappeared. Count Elias approached then, smiling warmly. "Your Grace," he greeted politely. Lucian nodded stiffly. Elias looked toward Celeste with unmistakable affection. "Lady Beaumont promised me the next dance." Lucian looked at her instinctively, waiting, hopping. But Celeste simply placed her hand into Elias's and walked away. That night, Lucian remained awake until dawn, because for the first time in years, fear entered his heart. Not fear of scandal, not fear of politics, fear that he had truly lost her forever. The gossip began again within days. Only now it sounded different. People no longer whispered cruelly about Celeste Beaumont. Instead, they spoke of her beauty returning to court, of her elegance beside Count Elias, of their approaching wedding. Lucian heard her name constantly. At dinners, in parliament halls, across crowded salons, every mention felt like reopening an old wound. And the more society adored her, the more unbearable his regret became. One rainy evening, Lucian attended a private musical gathering at the estate of Lady Montfort. He had not intended to stay long. Then he saw Celeste sitting near the grand piano beneath candlelight. Her silver gown shimmered softly while musicians played nearby. Several gentlemen surrounded her conversation circle, all of them smiling too easily, too warmly. Lucian hated himself for noticing how many men watched her. But what truly unsettled him was how little she seemed to care anymore. Years ago, Celeste had moved through society carefully, quietly. Now she carried herself with calm confidence that no longer sought approval from anyone, including him, especially him. A young viscount began openly flirting with her near the piano. Lucian watched Celeste respond politely, then laugh softly at something the viscount said. The sound pierced straight through him. Before he fully realized what he was doing, he crossed the room. The viscount looked startled when Lucian suddenly interrupted their conversation. "Apologies," Lucian said coolly. "Lady Beaumont promised me a word." Celeste's eyes lifted toward him, surprised. The viscount quickly excused himself under the weight of Lucian's stare. Silence settled between them once they stood alone near the balcony doors. Rain struck the glass outside. "You frightened him," Celeste said calmly. "I did not intend to. That is unfortunate. It seemed quite intentional." Lucian exhaled slowly. "You should not encourage men like him." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "And why does that concern you?" "Because I cannot breathe watching other men touch your hand. Because I cannot sleep knowing another man will marry you. Because I have loved you every day since I destroyed you." But Lucian said none of those things. Instead, he looked away. "The court talks." A faint sadness crossed her face then, not anger, disappointment. "You once cared greatly about what the court said." The words struck deeply because they were true. Lucian finally met her gaze again. "I cared about protecting my family. I was not part of that family yet." He had no answer. The rain outside grew heavier. For a moment, the music inside the ballroom faded beneath old memories, winter gardens, shared carriage rides. The way Celeste once smiled when snow began falling, Lucian remembered all of it too vividly. "You disappeared without a word," he said quietly. She stared at him for several seconds, then spoke softly. "You made it very clear I was unwelcome." Restraint in her voice hurt more than accusation. Lucian stepped closer unconsciously. "I searched for you." Her expression finally cracked slightly. "You searched after you abandoned me publicly." Regret tightened painfully inside his chest. "Celeste." "No." Her voice remained gentle but firm. For the first time, he realized something terrifying. She no longer feared losing him. That realization shook him more than anger ever could. Because years ago, he had always known she loved him. Now he no longer knew anything at all. Count Elias approached moments later, and Lucian hated how naturally Celeste relaxed beside him. Elias noticed the tension immediately, yet his voice remained courteous. "Lady Beaumont, your carriage is prepared." Lucian looked towards Celeste instinctively, wanting her to stay, but she merely nodded, then paused before leaving. "Good night, Your Grace." Nothing more, no warmth, no lingering glance, and as Lucian watched her leave beside another man, something dangerous began growing quietly beneath his restraint. Not merely regret anymore, need. Winter settled heavily across Paris. Snow covered palace gardens and carriage roads while invitations for Celeste Beaumont's wedding began circulating among the nobility. Lucian received his invitation 3 days before Christmas. He stared at it for nearly an hour, then threw it into the fire, only to pull it back out moments later before the edges fully burned. His servants pretended not to notice. The Duke had become increasingly restless in recent months, short-tempered, distracted. Sometimes he rode through snowstorms alone for hours without explanation. And always, somehow, the rides ended near whichever estate Celeste currently occupied. One evening, Lucian attended a royal opera performance solely because he knew she would be there. He hated himself for it, yet still he came. The theater glowed warmly beneath golden chandeliers while nobles filled velvet balconies with whispered conversation. Celeste sat beside Count Elias several rows below Lucian. Beautiful, untouchable. The Count leaned close occasionally during the performance, murmuring quiet remarks that made her smile. Lucian's jealousy had become exhausting. But worse than jealousy was the growing realization that Elias genuinely cared for her, protectively, patiently. The kind of gentleness Lucian himself had failed to offer when it mattered most. Halfway through the performance, a sudden winter storm struck the city. Snow and violent wind battered the theater windows. Guests began departing early. Outside, carriages struggled through icy streets. Lucian exited the opera house just as he heard raised voices nearby. One of Celeste's carriage wheels had broken in the storm. The horses had become frightened. Servants rushed anxiously through the snow. Without hesitation, Lucian crossed toward her. "Take my carriage," looked startled beneath her hood. "That is unnecessary. It is freezing." Count Elias stepped forward calmly. "I can escort Lady Beaumont." "The roads are dangerous," Lucian replied sharply. The two men held each other's gaze for several tense seconds. Celeste noticed it immediately, that terrible masculine tension beneath polite words. Finally, Elias turned toward her gently. "You should go." Lucian hated how much she trusted the Count's opinion. After several moments, Celeste reluctantly entered Lucian's carriage. Snowstorm winds howled outside as the carriage began moving through dark Paris streets. Inside, silence settled heavily between them. The small lantern light softened her features. Lucian noticed she looked tired, not physically, emotionally, as though constantly carrying memories she no longer spoke aloud. "You should not have come tonight," she said quietly. "I wanted to hear the music." That is not why you came. His jaw tightened slightly. Honesty surprised both of them. The carriage rocked gently through snow-covered roads. Outside, winter blurred the city into pale shadows. You love him? Lucian finally asked. Celeste looked toward the window. After a long silence, she answered carefully. He is kind to me. Response devastated him because it was not truly an answer, and somehow that gave him hope, dangerous hope. He would never humiliate you publicly, Lucian said bitterly. Her eyes slowly returned to him. For the first time that evening, genuine emotion surfaced there, pain. You are right, she whispered. Lucian looked away immediately, ashamed. The carriage grew quieter, then suddenly the wheels jolted violently against frozen ground. Celeste lost balance as the carriage lurched sideways. Lucian caught her instinctively before she struck the wooden wall. His arm wrapped around her waist. Her hand pressed against his chest. Everything stopped. For one suspended moment, they remained painfully close. Lucian could feel her breathing. Feel the warmth of her beneath layers of silk and winter fur. His voice lowered. Celeste. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw it, not indifference, not hatred, the terrible remains of love buried beneath years of hurt, which somehow felt even crueler, because she pulled away almost immediately, as though closeness itself had become dangerous. The carriage finally stopped outside her estate. Lucian stepped down first, offering his hand. Snow fell softly around them. Before entering the gates, Celeste paused. You once asked why I disappeared. Lucian's heart tightened. She lowered her eyes briefly. Because remaining near you hurt more than leaving. Then she walked away into the snowfall, and Lucian stood there long after the doors had closed behind her, realizing too late that the woman he loved had once fled simply to survive him. Lucian began noticing strange things after that night, small details, fragments of memory that no longer settled correctly in his mind, especially concerning his younger brother Adrian, the prince's scandal, the timing of Celeste's disappearance, and most troubling of all, Adrian's fear. One afternoon, Lucian entered his private study unexpectedly and found Adrian burning old letters inside the fireplace. His brother looked alarmed. What are those? Nothing important. Lucian stepped closer. One half-burned page remained visible among the flames. Royal seals, military discussions, treason accusations. Cold realization spread through him slowly. What have you done? Adrian's face turned pale. The truth finally emerged in broken pieces. Years earlier, Adrian had secretly aided noble factions plotting against the crown, carelessly, foolishly. The prince involved in the scandal had discovered everything. Celeste learned the truth accidentally during a royal gathering. And rather than expose Adrian, she met privately with the prince to beg for silence. Those secret meetings became the source of the affair rumors. Lucian felt physically ill. She protected us, he whispered. Adrian could barely meet his eyes. She said scandals surrounding her would distract the court from investigating further. Lucian staggered backward slightly. Every memory now became unbearable, her silence, her humiliation, her refusal to defend herself, because she had been protecting his family all along. Protecting him, and he had destroyed her publicly while she carried that burden alone. What did you promise her? Lucian asked hoarsely. Adrian's voice broke. She only asked that you never learn the truth. For the first time in years, Lucian lost all composure. He struck the desk hard enough to split the wood, then turned away sharply, breathing unevenly, because he suddenly understood the full weight of what she had sacrificed, not merely reputation, not merely social standing. She had sacrificed herself for the man who abandoned her. That realization shattered something inside him completely. That evening, Lucian rode through freezing rain toward Celeste's estate without thinking. He arrived soaked, breathless, desperate. Servants looked startled as he demanded to see her. Celeste entered the drawing room moments later in a pale blue gown. She stopped immediately upon seeing his face. Something was wrong. Lucian stared at her for several painful seconds, and finally asked in a broken voice, why? Her expression changed instantly, not surprise, resignation. You spoke with Adrian. Why would you allow them to hate you for something you never did? She looked away quietly, because your brother was terrified. What about you? Lucian demanded. Were you not terrified? Emotion finally cracked through her composure. Yes. The single word destroyed him. Rain battered the windows behind them. Lucian stepped closer slowly. I condemned you in front of the entire court. You did. I never even asked if it was true. No, every answer she gave remained painfully calm, and somehow that calmness hurt worse than rage. Lucian's voice lowered roughly. You loved me then. She closed her eyes briefly. Yes, past tense again, his chest tightened violently. Celeste, look at me, she did. And for the first time since her return, he saw tears gathering in her eyes, not fresh heartbreak, old heartbreak, the kind that had lived too long inside someone. I waited for you to trust me, she whispered. Even once. Lucian could barely breathe. I know. But you chose the court instead. He wanted to deny it, could not, because she was right. The silence between them became unbearable. Then Celeste stepped back carefully. You should leave, your grace. Title cut through him again. Call me that. A fragile sadness crossed her face. It is the only thing I have left to call you. Lucian finally understood that regret could arrive too late to repair the damage it caused. After the truth emerged, Lucian could no longer tolerate society's version of events. Every ballroom conversation became unbearable. Every noble compliment toward him felt undeserved. Because while France admired the Duke of Devereux, he knew exactly what kind of man he had once been: cowardly, proud, blind. Meanwhile, preparations for Celeste's wedding continued. The entire court anticipated the grand ceremony between Lady Beaumont and Count Elias. Even the Queen approved warmly of the match. Lucian felt panic growing steadily beneath his restraint. Not merely jealousy anymore, something far worse. The terrifying realization that he could not imagine life without seeing her. One evening, he attended a winter banquet at the royal palace. Celeste arrived late beside Count Elias. The room brightened around her immediately. Lucian watched nobles greet her with admiration, watched Elias pull out her chair gently, watched her smile softly during conversation. And suddenly he realized something devastating. She had learned how to live without him. That truth hollowed him out completely. Later that evening, Lucian found Celeste alone inside the palace conservatory. Snow pressed softly against the glass ceiling above them. Moonlight silvered the winter roses surrounding the room. She turned as he approached. Weariness crossed her expression briefly. You should not follow me anymore. I cannot stop. Honesty startled her. Lucian moved closer slowly. I know the truth now. Celeste's gaze lowered immediately. I never wanted you to. I knew what it would do to you. Answer nearly broke him. Even after everything, she had still tried protecting him from guilt. Lucian laughed bitterly under his breath. You sacrificed yourself for my family. Yes, I repaid you by destroying your life. Pain flickered across her face. You do not need to say it aloud. But I do. His voice roughened. Every day since you returned, I have watched another man stand beside the woman I should have protected. Silence filled the conservatory. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass. Lucian looked at her carefully. I loved you long before our engagement. Her eyes widened slightly. He continued quietly. I loved you when you argued with ministers twice your age without raising your voice. I loved you when you fed stray dogs outside the cathedral because you thought nobody noticed. I loved you when you smiled during storms because rain made the world quieter. Celeste looked shaken now, because these were not shallow observations. He had truly seen her all along and still abandoned her. That is what makes it cruel, she whispered. Lucian closed his eyes briefly. I know. Her voice trembled slightly for the first time. You do not understand what it did to me standing there while everyone watched you reject me. The words landed like a blade. I know. No, Lucian, you do not. Hearing his name again nearly unraveled him. Tears gathered in her eyes despite her efforts to remain composed. I loved you enough to ruin myself for your family. And when they turned against me, you never came after me. Lucian stepped toward her desperately. I was wrong. Yes. The simplicity of her answer hurt more than fury. For several moments neither spoke. Then Celeste finally whispered, I spent years teaching myself not to love you anymore. Fear spread coldly through Lucian's chest. Did you? She looked at him for a very long time, then answered with heartbreaking honesty. I do not know. That fragile uncertainty became the only hope he had left. The royal masquerade arrived beneath falling snow and thousands of candlelights. It would be the final grand gathering before Celeste's wedding. Nobles from across Europe filled the palace in elaborate masks and silk. Music drifted through endless golden halls. Yet beneath the beauty of the evening, tension quietly followed Lucian everywhere. Because rumors had begun spreading. Whispers that the Duke of Devereux intended to stop the wedding. Whispers that he had become obsessed with the woman he once rejected. For once, the rumors were true. Lucian stood alone near the ballroom entrance watching guests dance beneath crystal chandeliers. Then he saw her. Celeste wore silver again, the same color she had worn the night he destroyed her. But tonight she looked different, stronger, no longer fragile beneath society's gaze. People moved around her naturally, drawn toward her warmth. And Lucian realized the world had finally become worthy of her after failing her once. Count Elias approached him quietly some time later. I believe you love her very much. Lucian looked toward the Austrian count carefully. Elias smiled faintly. She speaks of you less than she once did, but never without pain. The words struck deeply. You deserve better than this, Lucian admitted. Perhaps, Elias said calmly, but she deserves honesty more than either of us. Before Lucian could respond, Elias stepped aside, leaving him staring after the man who had shown Celeste more kindness in 2 years than Lucian had shown in one terrible night. Hours later, the Queen announced the beginning of the midnight dance. Masks glittered beneath candlelight as couples filled the ballroom floor. Celeste stood near the center beside Elias, and Lucian realized with terrifying clarity that if he remained silent now, he would lose her forever, not because she stopped loving him, but because he had never fought for her when it mattered. The orchestra began playing. Lucian crossed the ballroom. Whispers immediately followed. Celeste turned as he approached. Shock flickered across her face. Lucian stopped before her beneath the chandeliers while all of high society watched once more. Only this time he refused to let her stand alone. He removed his mask slowly, then spoke clearly enough for the ballroom to hear. Years ago, Lady Celeste Beaumont was falsely condemned because she protected my family from ruin. Crashed through the hall. The Queen herself looked stunned. Lucian continued. She sacrificed her reputation to conceal a political scandal that would have destroyed my house. And while she carried that burden alone, I abandoned her publicly. Stared at him in disbelief. Pain thickened his voice. The shame belongs to me, not her. Whispers spread wildly through the ballroom, but Lucian only looked at Celeste because nothing else mattered anymore. I cannot undo what I did, he said quietly. I cannot return the years you lost. I cannot erase the humiliation I caused you. Emotion trembled visibly beneath his restraint now. I loved you then. I love you now. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting the moment I failed you. Filled Celeste's eyes. The ballroom remained utterly silent. Lucian stepped closer carefully. I am not asking for forgiveness tonight. His voice lowered. I am only asking if there is still space beside you for a man willing to spend forever earning it. Vulnerability in his expression stunned everyone watching, because powerful men rarely unraveled publicly, yet Lucian no longer cared. Celeste looked at him with tears trembling in her eyes. Years of heartbreak stood between them, years of silence, pain, longing, but also love that neither had fully escaped. Then unexpectedly, Count Elias stepped forward. The entire ballroom tensed, but Elias only removed the engagement ring from his own pocket gently and placed it into Lucian's hand. She never looked at me the way she looks at you, he said softly. Celeste closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed. Lucian stared at her helplessly. And for the first time in years, the cold Duke of Devereux looked afraid she would walk away again. Snow continued falling beyond the palace windows long after midnight. But inside the ballroom nobody moved, nobody even breathed too loudly. They were all watching Celeste Beaumont, waiting. Lucian stood before her with quiet desperation in his eyes, not demanding, not proud, simply exposed. For years he had hidden behind power and restraint. Now he had nothing left except honesty. Celeste looked down at the ring in his trembling hand. The same engagement ring she once returned beneath public humiliation. The memory still hurt. She could still hear the whispers from that night, still feel the loneliness afterward, still remember crying silently inside dark carriages so her family would not hear. And yet, she also remembered the man who used to walk slower whenever she wore uncomfortable shoes. The man who secretly sent blankets to poor villages during winter but never allowed anyone to know. The man who noticed when she was cold before she spoke. Lucian had loved her badly once, but he had loved her deeply all the same, and somehow that made forgiveness both harder and easier. Tears slipped quietly down her face. Lucian looked devastated by them. I know I do not deserve another chance, he whispered. Celeste answered honestly. The word visibly wounded him, but she stepped closer anyway. And perhaps part of me will always remember what happened that night. Lucian lowered his eyes. I understand. But hope flickered painfully across his face. Celeste's voice softened. You came back for me this time. Emotion finally broke through Lucian's restraint completely. Not dramatic, not loud, just raw relief. Like a man surviving after years beneath cold water, he looked at her as though afraid she might disappear again. I will come back for you every time, he said quietly. The ballroom had never heard the Duke of Devereux speak like that before. Without armor, without distance, just love, Celeste laughed softly through tears. A fragile, beautiful sound Lucian had missed for years. Then slowly, carefully, she placed her hand over his. The entire room seemed to exhale at once. Lucian closed his fingers around hers immediately, protectively, almost reverently, as though he still could not believe she remained there. The orchestra resumed playing somewhere behind them. Soft violin music filled the ballroom. Lucian looked at her uncertainly. For a moment, Celeste simply stared at him, then she nodded. He drew her gently into the center of the ballroom, and beneath thousands of candlelights, they danced together at last, not as Duke and future Duchess, not as political allies, but as two wounded people finally choosing honesty over fear. Snow drifted beyond the palace windows. The same winter that once witnessed their destruction now watched their beginning. Lucian held her carefully, like something precious he had nearly lost forever. And this time, when Celeste looked into his eyes, she no longer saw the man who abandoned her. She saw the man who finally understood what her love had cost. Weeks later, Paris awoke to shocking news. The Duke of Devereux had withdrawn temporarily from several royal duties, not for politics, not for war, but because Lady Celeste Beaumont wished to spend spring beside the southern coast before agreeing to another engagement. Society found the story wildly romantic, but only Lucian knew the truth. This was not courtship anymore. This was repentance. Happily, he accepted it. He followed her through quiet seaside villages, walked beside her through rainy gardens, listened when she spoke of the years she spent rebuilding herself after heartbreak. Sometimes she still grew quiet unexpectedly. Sometimes old pain returned to her eyes. And every single time Lucian stayed. No pride, no distance, only patience, only love. One evening near the coast, Celeste stood watching waves beneath a pink sunset while cold wind moved through her hair. Lucian approached slowly behind her. "You are quiet," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "I was remembering the girl who once believed loving you would destroy her." Pain crossed his face immediately. Celeste turned toward him gently. She survived. Lucian touched her hand carefully. Now she looked at him for several long seconds, then finally answered with soft certainty. "Now I think loving you may finally feel safe." Lucian closed his eyes briefly, overcome. When he kissed her forehead, it carried no desperation anymore. Only tenderness, only gratitude. And far away from the ballroom where everything once shattered, the Duke who had broken her heart finally learned how to love her without fear. While the woman he once lost discovered that sometimes the deepest romances are not built from perfection, but from being chosen correctly the second time. Story idea: the bride he rejected before the kingdom.